Hi, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with some new holiday inspiration. And today I'll be making this nearly one layer card featuring one of Penny Black's new, beautiful, and super fun bear stamps. But before we look at those stamps, I just wanted to pop up a supply list of everything used in this video. And I will put that back up on screen at the very end of the video. So if you'd like to look at it in more detail at that time, you can just hit pause and check it out. So here's a look at this adorable new stamp called Nose to Nose. This is a 3 by 4 inch transparent stamp set, so it's a really fun size and a great value. If you haven't done any sort of cute or critter stamping, this is a great place to start. And to begin, I'm working in my Misty and I'm stamping onto Canson 140 pound cold press watercolor paper. I am stamping this using Toffee Crunch Memento ink, and then I'm going to stamp this onto some masking paper too. So I'm going to do a little bit of masking here to create my scene. I've chosen this Memento ink because it's very light colored. It blends just a little bit with the water when I paint my scene, but I don't have to strain too hard to see it, but it does give the look of that no line stamping. Next, I'm going to add these birches to the background. I love these birches. I think they are so great for either elegant type cards or more cute type cards like this. I laid down my mask over the bears and also one I just hand trimmed to create sort of a snowy hill. And I'm going to ink this using archival ink. It's a mini size ink pad in Shadow Gray. This is a permanent ink, so it's very light and it will give the look of no line watercolor, but when I paint on top of it, none of that stamping is going to bleed or blend with the water because it's a permanent ink. So we will keep all of that great detail that's included in the birch tree stamp. So I used the tree that's on the stamp actually over on the right hand side. I slid it over and stamped it onto the left hand side of the card. And then I'm going to put these two trees over here on the right. So you can play around with your placement with these trees and you can get so many different looks using them. So again, I'm just inking that with the Shadow Gray ink and stamping it in my Misty. I'm sorry I'm a little bit off camera there. And now I'm actually going to use some of the little branches that extend off of the tree to add them down at the base of the scene. I just wanted to fill in this entire area that goes around the edge of that snowbank, and just to balance that design too and not leave a lot of empty space along the very edges of the card. So again, using that Shadow Gray and just sort of creatively turning the stamp and moving my paper and my items in the Misty, then I am just stamping that down. And next is the fun part, I think, is revealing those masks to see that entire scene ready to be painted. And before I start painting the bears, I am going to use a Faber-Castell Pit Artist pen. This is the very small. The S on the pen itself is the S size for small. And I'm just going to color in their noses and also the eyes. This is a permanent ink, so I can paint over the top of this and it won't bleed or blend. And then I'm going to start painting. So I am using my Sakura Koi Field Sketchbox watercolors. And you can see they're very loved watercolors. And I am not doing any mixing of the paints on a palette or anything. I'm just picking them up right out of the box, out of the Field Sketchbox, and painting them onto the bears. This is kind of like the first layer of paint and ink that I'm applying here, and I'll go back with some colored pencils to add in some of the details. I find with the watercolors it's a nice way to get a nice light wash of color. If you want to blend the colors into a very light tan or even into white, I find that's easier to do with watercolors than it is with Copic markers or colored pencils, just for me personally, but you really could paint or color this image with whatever your favorite coloring medium is. It's very simple design. Here I'm making them brown bears in the forest, but you can also make these into polar bears. If you just add like a little bit of gray shading to them, they could be polar bears and get a totally different look. I just think they are so cute. I couldn't wait to stamp these and paint these in. When I apply my paints, I typically put the brush that's loaded with paint and a little bit of water down in the area that I want the color to be the darkest. Then I will go back with water and blend that out. And if I have a little bit too much paint or water going on, I just dab my brush off on a paper towel and go back in and sort of lift up any excess water or paint using a fairly dry, or what we would call a thirsty brush. So here again you can see me putting down that darker color first, sort of blending that out, picking up a little bit more darker color here. Then I will get some more water onto my brush to blend that towards the area that I want to be the lightest. And I just follow that same process. I wanted to show you here the coloring of an entire bear. That way if you wanted to try this out yourself, you would see everything start to finish, at least for one of the bears, but I won't bore you too much and show you both bears. If I want to go back and darken things up, I will. Watercolor dries lighter typically, and I always like to start light because for me that's the most forgiving way. I can go light and say, oh, I think I want to go darker now, but I know exactly where I want those darker areas to be. And that's what I've done there, sort of on the head and the body of the bear. When it's still wet, sometimes I'll sort of pounce in or drop in a little bit of ink in the darker areas. And I also know I'm going to go back with those colored pencils, and I'll show you that at the end. So if there's any areas you aren't completely happy with your painting, the colored pencils can really fix things up for you. So now that I finished the bears, I am ready to move on to another part of the image. I'm going to work next on their scarves. So I did dry those in between before I moved on to the scarves so that there's no way that brown paint will sort of mix in with the reds and yellows that I'm doing. Here I'm just putting down some yellow watercolor on the areas that I want to sort of leave the lightest. Then I'll go back in with my red and blend that into the yellow. And that just helps me remember to leave that area of light. I find sometimes if I start with my darker colors with areas like this on the scarf where I really want to leave a nice bright light area, I will forget or I will put down too much color and not leave that light area. So I just started with that yellow in those spots just to guide me along as I added in the darker colors. I'm sort of working around as I add the red onto areas of the scarf that are not touching. That way everything doesn't start bleeding and blending into itself. You can also dry with a heat gun in between if you are impatient or you want to work on areas that are touching another area that is still wet. You can just dry that before you move on and add paint right next to it. And just like on the body of the bears, I start light and then go back in and get braver as I add darker colors and darker shading. I also can grab some yellow and blend that up into the red. And I like how this gives a somewhat traditional color scheme because you are having the red here, and then I will be painting the sky with a green, so that gives us that red and green Christmas colors. But with a touch of that yellow and the brown of the bears, it gives you a bit of a warm orange feel, and I like that in my holiday cards just for something a little bit different. And even though it's a cold, snowy scene, it does impart a little bit of warmth as well. Now you can see on the bears and the scarf that light Memento Toffee Crunch ink. It just sort of will slightly blend when the water is added near it, but not so much that it becomes difficult to work with or it's blending into the other colors that you're adding. But I really think this gives a nice no line watercoloring effect. So instead of stamping it with like a dark black outline, this just gives it a little bit softer look. but it is not so light that I feel like I am straining to try and figure out different parts of the image as I'm coloring it. And again, here you can see me getting a little bit braver and adding in some more red. Now I don't have my watercolor palette within view of the camera here. If I do that, it just becomes, I have to pan out so far, it's difficult to see what I'm painting. So, but play around with whatever watercolors or inks that you like to paint with and different color combinations. Because these colors are sort of mixing and blending on the paper as I go, um, it's difficult to sort of track and write down every exact color used. There's not a lot of colors within the Sakura Koi Field sketch box. So for example, on the bears, I just did those with the brown, and there's only one brown that is in that field sketch box. I'm going to add some of this red color up here on her bow. And now I'm going to add some shadows to the snow that are around them, and that's going to also define the edge of that snowbank that we had masked off behind them. So I'm just picking up some blue, same process as I did on their fur, putting down the heaviest concentration of paint where I want it to be darkest, and then blending that out towards white. And if I need to do any additional blending, I can do that with extra water on my brush. And if it's a little too dark or there's too much water, I dry off my brush on a paper towel that's just off camera right to the right hand side, and then I can go in and sort of lift color using that thirsty brush. While it's still wet, if I want to darken things up or define the edges a little bit more, I can go in and drop more paint in as I'm doing here on those right and left hand sides. I'll do the same here around the bears. I love that as part of this stamp, it does sort of include those snowy lines where they're sitting, so you don't have to do any guesswork where to add the shadows. You can just sort of paint right over those lines and they'll be exactly where they need to be. And I just adore that heart drawn in the snow too, so I'm going to be sure to make sure I add a shadow around that and make that a predominant feature there in the foreground. Now the blue was just a little bit brighter than I wanted it to be, so just right over top while it's still wet, I'm just dropping in a little bit of gray paint just to tone it down a little bit. Then I can just blend it a little bit more with some water. And here I'll begin to work on that heart. And adding a little bit of gray so that matches the other snowy shadows that I've already painted. And with a little higher concentration of that gray, I'm just defining the edge of that snowbank some more. Now before I worked on the trees, I wanted to get this background in. So here I'm just using the green, the light sort of olive green that's in my palette, and painting that on. I want it to be a little bit darker towards the snow and lighter as it moves up towards the sky. And I did dry those snowbanks before I started painting this in, so they didn't blend up into the green when I painted right up next to it. Just like on all the other parts, putting down the heaviest concentration of paint near the bottom, blending it as I move up towards the top, and then I can go back in with more water to blend it some more if I need to. I can drop in more paint if I want it to be darker while it's still wet, and just make it easy to blend. And I will follow that same process for the center portion of the image as well. Once that was done, I'm going to add some blue to these birch trees. You could also do some gray if you want it to be a little more traditional. I wanted to tie into the blue of the snow. And I like the contrast of that blue next to the green sky, just something a little bit different. Now here's where I really love stamping these in that archival ink, because you can see as I put the watercolor paint over the top that you still can see all that beautiful detail of the birch stamp itself. And it looks like you painted all that in because it sort of takes on the color of the paints you're putting over the top of it. And so it's very easy to have these very detailed looking trees just by stamping them in that archival ink and then painting right on top using watercolors. I'm also going to add a touch of gray to that blue just so it ties in again to that stamping or that painting that was done on the snowbanks down below. I'm even going to pull in a little bit of the brown from the bears and pull that into the trees too, darkening up those edges of the tree and really giving them that look of roundness. I love that little heart that's included on that tree. I just think that is so whimsical and fun and goes great with this bear stamp itself. This would be great for a Christmas card. You could also send this card in the winter just as a happy card to send a friend, to send a smile. It'd make a great birthday card or an anniversary card if you had a winter birthday or winter anniversary. And I love that about these stamps when you can get more from them than just your just a Christmas card. They're very versatile and very fun. I'm adding a little shading here onto those branches. And as things dry, just kind of darken them up to my liking. Now here's where I'm just going in with some Prismacolor pencils, and I have the exact colors used listed at the very end of the video up on screen. I try to get them pretty sharp, and then just using motions that mimic and copy the lines of the stamp, the way that the fur is drawn on the stamp. I'm just adding touches of that here and there onto the image. And I think this is just a really fun touch. You certainly wouldn't have to add it. If you like the softer look without it, you can leave this step off. It also is very nice here on the scarf to just really darken up some of these shadows, and instantly you see that start to get more dimension, look more lifelike when you add in those darker reds, kind of blend them out with some brighter yellows. I like bright, bold colors, so sometimes with watercolors I like to go in and add this pencil right on top because for me it does brighten things up quite a bit. And since most of the coloring is already done, it's just these little fun touches I think that are great to go in and add in with the pencil. It's not too much, it's not too much work. Same thing here on the tree, some areas that I wanted to be a little bit darker. I'm just going in with the brown pencil and adding that in. And when that goes on those little branches, it is just amazing how much more lifelike they begin to look. And now I'm ready to add my sentiment. This is from another new transparent set. It's just the Let It Snow, but this is the transparent set Christmas bunch, and I will have some more cards coming with this stamp set using these same techniques very soon. I just really had so much fun with these cute new stamps from Penny Black. So I'm stamping this with potting soil archival ink. Did it in my MISTI so I could do multiple impressions onto the textured watercolor paper. And before I'm done, since it says Let It Snow, I'm going to draw in some snow using my white gel pen. So here's another look at that finished card. I hope you had fun watching it all come together and are inspired to give it a try. If you enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website and blog. And I will link all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. Thanks so much for watching, and here's that list of supplies that I promised.